Hello, everybody. Welcome to your post daily news show for Tuesday, April the 12th. It continues to be John Pollock week here on the Post Daily News Show, and we have a packed show coming your way. At the end of the show, we'll be getting to the other news and notes happening in the industry. We'll also make time for your super chats if you want to get those in. But today, we have a very special guest that is joining us right off the bat. It's a very busy day for this man because today he is releasing his brand new book, Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of the original Sheik. He is a former managing editor at WWE, overseeing their magazine division throughout the 2000s. A pleasure to welcome Brian Solomon to the program. Brian, how are you doing today? I imagine it's a very busy one for you.
Yes, thank you for having me on, John. Yes, it is. This is like the day. This is the day I've been waiting for almost 3 years. So it's all going down now.
Having never released a book myself, and just all of the time, the research that has gone into it, is it an excitement, a nervous energy that you have today? This is the culmination of what I can only imagine is months and months of work on your end.
Yeah, I mean, I first pitched the idea in the summer of 2019, and so it feels like a lifetime ago. I mean, it was before the pandemic, I mean, so much has changed, and I've been working nonstop through most of that. And, I started writing it at the end of 2019. So this has been a big journey, and it's a very gratifying feeling. This is my fourth book, but I could just sense and feel, and I have been for a while now, that this is the biggest one for sure. I mean, I've been really working hard to raise awareness about it for the past couple of years, and I think it's worked.
When it comes to ECW Press, that has such an extensive history of professional wrestling books, what is it that they are looking for when you are pitching such an idea to them, that they are looking, from their vantage point of who they are seeking as an audience as well?
Right. So I wasn't even sure or guaranteed that they would be interested because, ECW Press, for people that don't know, of course, they have nothing to do with ECW, the wrestling promotion.
No.
It's just a pure coincidence. Pure coincidence. They're a Canadian publisher, and wrestling is only a small part of what they do. They do a lot of book publishing. They have a wrestling line, and they've been very selective in the past few years now because the boom of wrestling books has slowed down a little bit. So they're very careful. Like, they recently did the Andre the Giant biography that Bertrand Hébert and Pat LaPrade did. And I mean, that's Andre the Giant. That's an easy sell. He was one of the most iconic pop culture figures in human history. So, but when it comes to other books, you never know. It's never a guarantee. So I'm just glad that they believed in it to put it into their rotation of the handful of wrestling books that they put out a year. They believed in it. This is someone that's been talking about the Sheik. He's been gone for almost 20 years, and really his peak in the wrestling business was almost 50 years ago. So it's definitely not a gimme that they would have gone for it, but the appeal is still there in the US and Canada. So they got behind it, and I'm glad that they did because it's already selling out. The original run of books is selling out already.
That's tremendous news. Very happy to hear that. It's I got a chance to read an early copy of the book, and I was floored by the research that you put into this, Brian. I mean, it's just meticulous how detailed you got in here. When it comes to researching a figure like Ed Farhat, what are some of like your best friends during this portion of just trying to dig into a period that there's a lot of mythology that you have to sift through to find the real story?
A lot of mythology, and also, unfortunately, not a lot of people still around, especially people that were really his peers at his level. I mean, if the Sheik were alive today, he'd be 96 years old. So, I mean, the people really at his level, there's really no one. The next best thing were kind of the wrestlers that were coming up as rookies in his era, people that got to know him well, like Terry Funk was terrific, Kevin Sullivan, Flying Fred Curry, who was, a regular main eventer in the Detroit territory for Sheik as a young wrestler, and his father, of course, Wild Bull Curry, who knew the Sheik very well. People like that were extremely helpful. Dave Brzezinski was irreplaceable. He was Supermouth Dave Drayson. He was the Sheik's last manager and a close confidant, and he's kind of like the dean of Detroit wrestling these days. And he took me under his wing, and most of the photos in the book are from him. I also want to mention too, and it was unfortunate, but really the leading kind of fan Detroit fan slash historian, old school fan, was a guy named Mark Boujan, who people may have
Mm-hmm.
heard of. He was like the Detroit wrestling super fan, and he passed away during the making of the book, really. So like he reached out to me in the beginning, and he was hugely instrumental and helped make introductions and contacts and things, point me in right directions. And then unfortunately he suddenly passed away about a year ago, which was really crushing. And he was one of the dedications that I put at the beginning of the book. But I mean, people like that. And look, I never would have been able to do this book, I really don't think, if I was working in an earlier time period, because the internet and digital archives and the ability to reach out and get this kind of esoteric information, ancestry.com, newspapers.com, being able to reach out to get government records over the web and request things. I was able to get a hold of his death certificate. I was able to get a hold of his military records. If I was writing this book 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would have to be this. It would have taken me maybe like a decade, honestly, really, to put this much work and research into it. So being able to do most of it from my office at home was a huge help.
How about in terms of family members of Ed's that maybe you were able to reach out to and contact, and as well like this veil of secrecy that Ed Farhat presented himself in, and reluctance from those around them to kind of let that guard down, because there are stories in this book that people will be learning about for the first time. It is by far the most detailed look at this man.
Thank you. Well, this is not, and I want to be clear, this is not your typical, it's not an autobiography. Obviously, the Sheik is gone. It's not written from the point of view, of the actual subject of the book. It's an independent biography. It's not an authorized thing. It's not that I didn't want family involvement. It's just something that just could not come to pass. As you said, very reluctant, really wanting to take the Sheik's secrets, to the grave as he did. And there have been talk over the years of a Sheik biography being done by the family, but it never quite came together. And then, of course, Joyce, his wife, passed away. And I had been in contact with and been having talks with Eddie Farhat Jr., the Sheik's son, for months during the making of the book. And, they were very friendly talks. It was nothing adversarial, or there was no acrimony. But again, he was very hesitant to take part, especially because I think if he was going to take part in a book, this was his point of view. He wanted it to be his book. He wanted it to be the family's book, not written by somebody else without their involvement. Like, he didn't want to just be somebody that was interviewed. You know what I mean? Like, he wanted it to be, this is the official book of the Farhat family. And that's really a different project. But unfortunately what happened was Eddie was kind of wavering, and he really was telling me that he was thinking of helping out. And then a lot of tragedy struck the family, unfortunately. With Eddie's younger brother, Tommy, died from cancer, and Eddie was understandably really not interested in talking or doing anything after that. And he told me he needed a little bit of time, and then he passed away. He was also immunocompromised. He got COVID. He passed away. And that really put an end to any kind of family talks, unfortunately. That was his will. His desire was to not really take part in this book, at least without it becoming their book, and they're getting paid exorbitant sums of money, which is not in the cards. Far, far more than I was even being paid to write it. It's something like that we just couldn't come to an agreement on. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because sometimes an independent biography is really going to be the most thorough type of biography. If I'm writing a biography of Richard Nixon, for example, I may not go to Richard Nixon's family for permission. I may not even want to. It might wind up being a better book to have the freedom to write it my way. I mean, it's my book. It's my project. It's the story that I wanted to tell.
I think this is the way you almost have to go. And we're seeing it on such a large scale as well, Brian, that when you see a lot of these documentaries, like high-end ones with major athletes, it's with their, co-signing off of it, and it
Right.
very much becomes their voice that comes through, and it's their story. And I don't think you're able to get as clear a picture, because there's a lot of highs to talk about with Ed Farhat. There are a lot of lows that you cover in
Yes.
this as well, and I think that it's as much of a learning tool to see the rise of big time wrestling and where it hits such a peak point in the mid 70s and the precipitous decline afterwards, where we just see it's like a snowball rolling downhill. And I think it was a fascinating look into someone who is not only a promoter, but also the central figure of that territory that is unable to separate the two.
Yeah, and which was so common back then too. Like I even mentioned in the book, you had people like Vern Gagne and Eddie Graham and even Dory Funk Sr. and Fritz von Erich, right? Everybody knows. And the thinking being, I'm the only person I can trust, really. I'm the only person I can guarantee is never going to leave because I'm the promoter and I own it. So I'm going to make myself the top star. There was a lot of impetus to do that. And honestly, probably nobody was more insistent about it than the Sheik, really, because all the other names I mentioned, they eventually did step back, even if it was just to say, okay, now it's going to be my kids. You know what I mean? They eventually did. And with Sheik, he never really quite could do that. He tried to do it with Eddie Jr. When he made him Captain Ed George at the very end, but it really didn't take. And even then, he didn't fully commit to it. It was still the Sheik was clearly the top guy. But I wanted to mention too about what you were saying about those authorized versions of stories a lot of the time, especially with athletes. I want to make it clear because I think in the world of wrestling books, I think fans and readers have gotten very used to the autobiography, right? It started with Mick Foley. He really put it on the map. And this idea that any wrestling biography or book that's worth its salt, it has to be written by the subject, by the person whose life it was. That's really not true. In some, it just happens to be what we've seen mostly in wrestling. There haven't been a ton of independent biographies where a writer and a researcher says, I want to look at this person's life independently and write a non-biased story. There was the Buddy Rogers one that came out recently. Obviously, the from Tim Hornbaker, the Andre the Giant one that I just mentioned. Independent authors writing it from their point of view, and that's a valuable thing, I think, to have. And so, this is that kind of a book. This is because sometimes, as you said, when it is an autobiography and when it is from the point of view of the celebrity, you're going to get the version of the story that best protects them. And look, I want to be clear that this is not a hit job. This is not a book that's looking to bury anybody or slander anybody. You mentioned highs and lows. The purpose of the book, first and foremost, is to preserve the legacy of the Sheik and make sure that he's well remembered by later generations. But I'm not looking to drag anybody's name through the mud. But by the same token, I can't leave out things that are essential to the story. Like I'm not going out of my way to write a book that makes somebody look really terrible. Like I think about the John Lennon, the Albert Goldman biography that came out a long time ago, where he just destroyed him out of spite. It's not that kind of a thing. But if I'm telling the story of the downfall of big time wrestling and his company going down the tubes, I can't just ignore the reasons why it happened. There are reasons, and some of them are his fault. And so that's when I have to get into the low parts of things. It's part of the story.
Yeah, and I find that to be a really compelling part. And I would say that you are contextualizing a lot of what we saw of Ed Farhat. Like when we see him in that horrific scene in that FMW ring in 1992, here is a 65-year-old man. Why is this man in this ring at 65 still doing this? And I think you really get some insight into Ed Farhat. And this was somebody that, I mean, he had an iron grasp of that spotlight, and I think it was very hard to let go of it, as well as financial woes that came with like the loss of the territory and how fast a territory can turn, and it's very hard to move that snowball uphill once it is picking up speed.
Yeah, he didn't seem to know any other way really to make money. It was sort of like there's a quote in the book that Fred Curry told me that he attributed to Joyce, where he said something like, she said something to him like, this business sucks and the Sheik just doesn't know when to get out of it. He just can't stop. And so whenever he gets into these financial binds later in life, his solution is always, well, I got to keep wrestling. I got to keep taking dates. And it's hard to blame him when Onita is paying him $10,000 a match. Who would say no to that? But, it takes a toll, obviously.
When it comes to some of the territorial wars that Ed Farhat went through, I mean, you document them here with Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder. Then there was a contingent in 1974 that, I mean, Farhat's over in New Japan and they go to form International Wrestling. I mean, there were some extremely intense battles that he went through here. And I just wanted to get a sense from you just in studying these, any lessons that came out of this that might have informed Ed Farhat and a certain insecurity about those around him too, especially the 74 movement of a lot of key people in the territory.
Yeah, that was the one where they were just waiting for him to go to Japan and in order to flip on him, basically. And one of the people that did it, who led it, was Jack Kane, who was his booker. One of the most trusted people in his office, just said, okay, he's out of the country. Great. Let's start our own company in opposition. And this happened at least 3 major times. The Bruiser was the biggest one. And I think the lesson for me, because look, this stuff happened all the time in wrestling. It happened to Vince McMahon Sr. with the IWA. And, they would always take people back because there's no point in holding a grudge when there's money to be made. Why would you leave money on the table? But the difference with the Sheik that I found was, I think he had a little trouble inspiring loyalty in people. I think, there were a lot of people who had access to grind and who found it very easy to turn on him on a dime for a variety of reasons. Many people have said before me, he was not the greatest payoff man, unless he was one of your best friends. And he would pay you according to what he considered to be your worth. And also this thing, like we've said, of him constantly keeping himself on top. And anytime somebody got over as a really hot heel, he would turn them babyface so they would lose their heat. And he would beat them on top of it. They didn't even get to win as a babyface. So, you had a lot of people that would get fed up, and they would even Mark Lewin, one of his best friends, one of those people who goes off. Killer Tim Brooks, who he started in the business, basically goes off and tries it. It was a thing that happened to him regularly. I would say maybe even more than most promoters.
Being based in Toronto, I think that is, when you're looking at the constellation points of the Sheik, obviously Detroit is first and foremost, but Toronto was a massive city for the Sheik, and that period that he came in here and spiked business in a big way. But then there was also kind of the downside of coming off that period. Can you talk a little bit about his legacy in Toronto as well?
Yeah, I'm grateful to the legacy in Toronto, because I think that's a big reason of why ECW wanted to do the book, because they're Canadian and they do a lot of stuff about wrestling in Canada, obviously. And, Toronto, of course, for people that know, it's right across the Great Lakes from Detroit. So there's kind of like a brotherhood between these two territories. Sometimes people would even mistakenly think it was the same territory. Part of that was because they even had the same announcer, Lord Athol Leighton, who would just go back and forth between the two. But when Frank Tunney, who was running the Toronto territory, Maple Leaf Gardens being their main venue, when he saw the success Sheik was having, he thought it was a no-brainer to bring Sheik into Maple Leaf Gardens, and he also made him his booker too. And he had this run, again, in the late 60s, early 70s, where he was super hot in Toronto. He went 127 singles matches at the Maple Leaf Gardens without a loss. Now, of course, he was booking those finishes, but people kept coming back. So, I mean, even though he was winning by DQ, by countout, but he was never losing. And he was going in against Gene Kiniski, Dory Funk, Jack Briscoe, Lou Thez, Andre the Giant, all these people. And he was just, none of them were beating him, Eventually, that got kind of stale. And it happened more abruptly even in Toronto than in Detroit, where, I think the turning point was Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant was this hot newcomer to the business. Even back then, he was hardly losing matches. He was becoming a mainstream celebrity. And even he couldn't get the Sheik to lay down. So I think when that match happened and the Sheik beat Andre the Giant by countout, I think fans started to get a little bit fed up at that point, and Frank Tunney eventually wound up severing ties with him and going a different direction with other promoters instead of working with Detroit. And that was just another example of how he was just getting cut off by everybody, but by sometimes by his own practices.
An interesting figure in all of this that's more so focused on later in the book is Sabu. And I find it really intriguing because here was someone that obviously revered his uncle and was coming into an industry that was very different than Farhat's, where it was, he tried to preserve this image. He was very guarded. And it was at a time when the industry was being wide open in terms of that. And just seeing Sabu kind of navigate the decade of the 90s, it's very interesting to see him trying to, navigate through a very changing industry with ECW and beyond that.
Yeah, it was a mixed blessing. And Sabu even gets into that in his own book, which is very good. His own autobiography, which gives a lot of his insights, because you had a couple of things going on. I mean, I don't think Sabu would not have really taken off and succeeded without the hard work that his uncle put into making the right connections and getting him seen. When Onita wanted to bring Sheik into FMW, Sheik was the one he wanted. Nobody knew who Sabu was, and the Sheik said, "I'll come, but I'm bringing my nephew with me." And it was partly because he was trying to help get his nephew exposure. And it was also partly because he couldn't really do much anymore, the Sheik. And he needed somebody like that who was young and athletic and exciting to help to carry those matches a lot of the time. So he helped him really get going. But, and Sabu has said this as well too, some of those lessons of protecting kayfabe and protecting your character to the degree that the Sheik did weren't always maybe the right thing to do in the modern age, where it may have occasionally sabotaged him. And he even said that, like, even when dealing with Vince McMahon, and I was working for WWE at the time when they were relaunching ECW, they wanted Sabu to be the face of it. He was going to be like the John Cena of the ECW brand. I mean, they were gung-ho, but he didn't want to talk. And that was a big no-no. Vince is saying, well, look, if you're going to be my number one guy, which, I mean, Paul Heyman was able to pull it off without Sabu talking, but Vince is not Paul Heyman. And Vince said, if I'm going to make you the face of this brand, I need you to talk at least a little bit. And those kind of things became deal breakers. I mean, even at the Hall of Fame induction for the Sheik, Sabu did not want to speak. And that was something that Vince didn't take kindly to. And that's another reason why RVD was on the stage with him to do the induction. So, I mean, there are times maybe where you can take those lessons a little too far, of not trusting people, of protecting your character, of arguing over money the way the Sheik would. Sometimes when the business changes, those practices don't serve you as well as they used to.
Were you there that night at the Hall of Fame induction in 2007?
I was there. Yeah, I was in Detroit for that was WrestleMania 23 that weekend in Detroit. Yeah.
And it's always interesting when we look at historical figures, and I'm kind of curious on your assessment of, when it comes to these historical figures, of how much is wrapped up in who WWE deems as a historical figure that they are going to market. And I think it's so important to have books like this out there, because I think for a lot of people, WWE controls such a great concentration of the historical reference point, and I don't think that's a good place to be in when you want to learn the history of the industry.
It's true. There is the WWE version of history. And you know what? I want to say that I don't take it for granted either, because look, I remember a time when there was no version of history. WWE pretended like there was no history, and they wouldn't acknowledge anything. And that's not the case anymore. So there is something to be thankful for that. There is more of a understanding of history, but of course it's only used to market things and to sell things that they want to sell. And so it's going to be their version. And so when you have people that weren't really so directly involved with the WWE story over the years, they're not always treated as the legends that they should be treated as. It's the people that Vince remembers well, that served the company well, and things like that. And especially Vince Jr., Vincent K. McMahon, didn't have a lot of connection with the Sheik. His father did. So he's not in that inner circle of legends, but he was a bigger name and a bigger draw than probably 95% of all WWF stars, especially in the territory days. The only person that was a bigger star than him would be Bruno Sammartino from that era. So you're getting their version, like you said. So it's important to tell these stories, because look, because of that marketing machine, right? 90% of people over the age of 50, under the age of 50, if you mention Sheik, they're always going to think of the Iron Sheik. Even though in the grand scheme of things, the Iron Sheik was never as big of a star as the Sheik, not even close. But he was a mid-carder, But because he got that marketing machine behind him, he was in a Saturday morning cartoon, he was on an ice cream bar, he was on a lunchbox, People my age grew up with the Iron Sheik as being part of this cast of characters. Today, he has more cultural relevance. And so I'm trying to correct some of those things.
Well, I encourage everybody to pick up a copy. It is Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of the original Sheik. An incredible book in my estimation. If you want to check it out, it is out today through ECW Press. And Brian, where can people grab the book and other projects that you have going on as well?
So I want to address that too, because as of right now, and I was amazed to see this when I woke up this morning, physical copies of the book the original run is sold out on Amazon, sold out on barnesandnoble.com. My understanding, of course, you could still get a Kindle version. You can get the digital version anytime on Amazon. Amazon is supposed to be getting more books in later this month. Also, brick and mortar stores will be getting more in. I think there was a big underestimation on the demand for this book, which I guess is a good thing. But there are a few outlets online where you can still find physical copies. So I would tell people, if you're okay with a Kindle copy for now, go to Amazon. You can get the Kindle copy. If you definitely want that physical book, give it another couple of weeks. Keep checking Amazon. They've told me they're going to be getting more in. So that's a good thing. I mean, there's demand. I'm excited about that. As far as other projects go, the big thing I do right now is my own podcast, which I started a couple of months ago. It's called Shut Up and Wrestle, and it's through the Arcadian Vanguard Network, which has the Cornette podcast. That's probably how people most know it. Jim Cornette and Brian Last. Brian was kind enough to invite me on to put my podcast on his network. It's an old school wrestling podcast, so if that's your thing, I mean, this is the place. I've got a different topic every week, depending on who my guest is, what their interest is, and actually tomorrow's episode is going to be RVD, because RVD wrote the foreword to the book because he was trained by the Sheik. So it's called Shut Up and Wrestle. You can find it on all the podcast platforms, Spotify, Google, Apple. It's easy to find.
Perfect. Well, Brian, I want you to thank you for joining us, taking some time out of your day. I know it's a very busy one, and congrats on the early success. The demand is already through the roof for the book. I hope that continues, and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road. I would love to chat with you about your magazine endeavors in WWE. That's probably a whole show unto itself, but all the best with the book, and congratulations on the job.
Thank you so much, John. I'll come back anytime. You just say the word. I'll be there.
Thank you very much. That was Brian Solomon, folks. So you can go check that out. As I mentioned, I got a chance to read the book. I learned a ton reading it. That's my honest appraisal of the book. A ton that you will learn about Ed Farhat. I would say for any aspiring promoters out there that are working in the industry, there is a lot of lessons that you can take that can be applied from today. As much as the rise is sort of interesting, the fall is really, really fascinating stuff, and just seeing it as it plays out, what the reaction is as business goes down, and yet not changing the formula up. So much that you can go into regarding Ed Farhat. So for the rest of the show, I'm just going to go through a couple of the news and notes, and then we will get to your super chats. So for any of you in the chat, I am monitoring it if you want to throw in any super chats. So the latest on Shinjiro Otani. 01 has put out another update, specifically calling it now a cervical spinal cord injury. This, of course, that Otani suffered on Sunday in his match against Takeshi Sugiura, where he took a German suplex into the corner turnbuckle. He was transported to the hospital into the ICU and will be having surgery on Wednesday in Japan. And they added, currently, in order to prevent the infection of the new coronavirus, the hospital is in the form of contacting the family from the attending physician. And okay, so that's just more so going over the protocol. But the main takeaway from that is that he is undergoing surgery on Wednesday. We're hoping for the best. He was conscious, but not able to move his limbs. So everyone's hoping for some optimistic news to come out of this for the 49-year-old. WWE has announced that they are going to Principality Stadium in Cardiff, Wales, for their premium live event on Saturday, September the 3rd. This had been reported for some time that they would be going to the 70,000 plus seat stadium. So the date is now confirmed. It will be the day before AEW All Out. So it's going to be a massive weekend when it comes to back-to-back events. And they're promoting this as the first stadium event in the UK in 30 years, going back to Wembley Stadium with SummerSlam. I would imagine this is going to be the hottest crowd of the year for maybe any wrestling show. It is going to be rabid. I think this is going to be a hot ticket in Wales. I think they're going to get a ton of people traveling from around Europe to this show, and is going to be a big deal. Like, in many ways, this feels like the big summer show for the company, more so than either of the events in July, with Money in the Bank at Allegiant Stadium and then SummerSlam in Nashville, which also falls into the month of July. So once tickets go on sale, it's going to be very interesting to see if it is like a first day sellout. That would not surprise me at all. Like, this is going to be a high demand event, in my opinion. They have also stated that, we have the WWE's first quarter 2022 results that are going to be coming out on Thursday, May the 5th. And they will be releasing their report at 5 Eastern at the close of business that day. And then the call will be at 5 Eastern. So that will feature Vince McMahon, Nick Khan, Stephanie McMahon, and Frank A. Riddick III. So this will cover all of their business through March 31st. So maybe we'll get some more numbers in regards to the Rumble. We also had the return to Saudi Arabia in February. This will not cover WrestleMania weekend, but they might sprinkle in some news and notes regarding the success of WrestleMania weekend, because there was a lot positive for the company business-wise that weekend that they may be showing us some more color on, as they like to describe. So there you go. That will be coming up May the 5th. So circle that around your calendar. Earnings day from the WWE. Continuing on the WWE front, we go to our ratings notes from Friday night, and SmackDown did 2,260,000 viewers. This for the SmackDown coming out of WrestleMania, down 5.5% from the week prior in viewership. The demo doing a 0.60, 788,000 viewers. That data coming from Brandon Thurston at WrestleNomics and Showbuzz Daily. So down very, very minimal from the week before for the WrestleMania SmackDown edition. They were number one for the night among network programming. So it was a big night for SmackDown. A bigger night, I would say, for AEW Rampage. They had a commanding increase of 600,000 viewers that they averaged on Friday night, with a 0.25, 328,000 viewers in the demo. So this these were huge numbers. Now, putting into context, they did not have an NBA game on ESPN to go against, so that's helpful. What you want to see is that when the NBA is going against them, how much this holds up. This was like their biggest numbers in months. So it's not like this was just up over the last 3 weeks, which are pretty disappointing figures. But I mean, from week to week, we're talking a 32% spike in viewers, 70% spike in 18 to 49. They more than doubled their 18 to 34 audience. They quadrupled in females, 18 to 34, quadrupled from last week. So these were just enormous gains. And I would always say, like, when a number goes really, really down, you don't look at 1 week. When it's exceptionally high, I don't think you inflate all of the balloons either. But nonetheless, it's if this keeps up. Now, unfortunately, this Friday, the positive is that they have a huge match to promote in the Texas Death Match with Hangman Page and Adam Cole. The downside is that it's outside the time slot, 7 Eastern, 4 p.m. on the West Coast, which is just a dismal time to be running a match of any kind of significance. So that's a handicap that they have on Friday for sure. I don't know how much I would read into this Friday's number. You could certainly argue if this was the week to put that Texas death match on. I know they're in Texas, but nonetheless, it's not the most advantageous time slot for Rampage. But for some, personally, being on at 7 Eastern, and then that means me and Kate will be on here at 10, I'm more than happy with that new schedule for this Friday. So there you have it. And yeah, busy weekend, because Battle of the Belts will be taped Friday to air Saturday night, and it is scheduled to air in Canada. So folks, you might have to stream Rampage in Canada, but Battle of the Belts is listed for TSN 3 on Saturday night at 8 Eastern. That's the same night as the Windy City Riot. So there you go. Those are your ratings notes. And the final thing before we get out of here is NXT tonight that they are promoting as Championship Tuesday. So sometimes these themed shows that have some nice title to them, that can make some kind of difference. We have 3 title matches announced thus far. Mandy Rose will defend the NXT Women's title against Dakota Kai. We've got the NXT North American Championship with new champion Cameron Grimes defending against Solo Sikoa. And then the gauntlet match for the vacant tag titles after the titles were relinquished following the release of Nash Carter last week. So the teams that will compete in the gauntlet, Grayson Waller and Sanga, Brooks Jensen and Josh Briggs, Pretty Deadly, who made their NXT debut last Tuesday, the Creed Brothers, and then Legado del Fantasma will be in that match. So that's coming up tonight. Another note for Canadian viewers is it looks like due to the Seattle Kraken game, that's going to be airing on Sportsnet 360. So based on the schedule, NXT will be streaming on Sportsnet now at 8 Eastern, and then Sportsnet 360 will air it at midnight tonight. So if you're in Canada, I'm trying my best to play TV Guide for everyone. So we have a couple super chats, so we will get to those before we sign off here. Our first one comes from Felipe from Chile. Thank you for the F1 recommendation. You are my documentary tribal chief. Any personal favorite 30 for 30 doc? Greetings from Chile. Well, thank you, Felipe. I cannot tell you how much I am enjoying Drive to Survive. I finished the first season over the weekend. I am so glued to this series. I completely understand why it has had such an enormous impact on F1 because I am just sucked in to the point that I'm trying to catch up so that I can follow the actual season that is going on. So it's a tremendous series. I would say even if you're not a race fan, I think you would still be again, this is like any great documentary subject. It comes down to the characters involved, the stories that they tell, and racing is the backdrop. That's essentially it. Favorite 30 for 30 docs. You know what I actually have saved on mine is the 2 Escobars. And that is, chronicling Pablo Escobar and then the Colombian soccer player as well. And that is one that I watched, especially during the early couple of seasons of 30 for 30. I watched nearly all of them for several years. I love that series. There was the one, and I just thought the style of it was so interesting. I think the title is just June 17th, 1994. There is no interview subjects. There is no narration, as far as I remember. And it's just going through clips of what was going on. Of course, June 17th, 94, it's the Bronco chase with O.J. Simpson. And at the same time, we're going to other sports events that they're having to interrupt programming because of this national story that is emerging. And we're just going through all the different reactions to this. It's picture perfect when it comes to the editing of a documentary and doing so without narration, without any kind of script, without any interview subjects. To me, it's just working with those tools that one really stands out. But man, there's a lot of great 30 for 30s that you won't go wrong with. I mean, not all of them were hits, but a lot more hits than misses. So hopefully that answers your question. Another one here comes from Easy Attack. What do you think will happen with AEW once the Warner Brothers Discovery merger is complete? Oh, this is from Chris Ely. Yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, it could be, could there be a trickle down effect? Of course, that's very possible. The fact that AEW, it's not like they're looking at these negotiations that are about to start tomorrow, but nonetheless, we're not a crazy time period removed from where you can imagine the real serious negotiations are going to begin. And when it comes to earmarking more money for a product, could that get tied up? You never know. I think that anyone that's forecasting what is going to happen or what is not going to happen, it's at best educated guessing. And AEW is going to be a lot further down the totem pole when it comes to priorities, but at the same time, they could get caught up in it. They might not. I would say that it would probably make it tricky, I would think, not having any knowledge of this, that trying to get Ring of Honor onto any kind of platform attached to Warner Media, and you're looking, obviously Tony Khan doesn't want just the time slot, just to have the time slot. You want to have some monetary value that comes with that television contract for Ring of Honor, or a streaming contract, whatever. Could a deal like that maybe you could have pushed through a year ago, are they able to push something through like that now? Is that going to be put on the back burner? A lot of questions with Ring of Honor of, its true viability, and, even looking at, if you are Warner Media, that we've been behind this new brand of AEW. If we're going to put wrestling on, we want to put the brand that we've kind of put this investment into, and not some foreign letters that we have not been attached to for all this time. There's many questions with Ring of Honor, and I think that those continue to be asked. And if you look at our guest yesterday, Mark Ramundi, in his recent interview with Tony Khan, I mean, he's kind of making his pitch out there. He wants this to be a weekly series, and I think wants it to be with Warner Media, but it's tough. Thus far, we have seen this, of the giant media rights bubble. WWE has been able to penetrate that bubble. AEW to a lesser degree, but has gotten, to make real money off of this. But every other wrestling company, like in the US, they have not been able to, enjoy that same level of value that, makes running a Ring of Honor as a full-time operation worthwhile. So yeah, the merger is something that, we all have to be following, and, could there be repercussions? Yes, maybe not as well. I would say there would be way more concern if those rights were coming up anytime soon, or imagine if this merger was happening right at that time, early 2020, where, they ripped up the deal and signed up AEW to that brand new $175 million contract. That was such an incredible deal that AEW got, and the timing of it right before the pandemic. To me, you cannot put enough emphasis on that deal transpiring when it did, and being a lifesaver for AEW. All right. Thank you guys for the super chats, and thank you for tuning in. I am not going to be back tonight. Instead, you are going to get Braden Harrington and Davey Portman. They're going to be live at 10:15 p.m. Eastern time at twitch.tv/upnextpodcast, chatting about Championship Tuesday coming out of tonight's show on the USA Network. I'll be back tomorrow live at 1 p.m. Eastern time. No guest scheduled yet, so that is to be determined. And then Wednesday night, might as well go over the schedule a little bit here. So Wednesday night, I'm going to be joined by Bruce Lord for Rewind at Dynamite. We will be live at 10:05 p.m. Eastern time here on the channel for everybody to chat about Dynamite, with Minoru Suzuki against Samoa Joe for the television title. On Thursday, brand new edition of the British Wrestling Experience. So I'm sure they will be chatting about this Cardiff announcement by WWE, 1PW. I'm sure there are many subjects that Benno will be discussing with Andy Ogden on this Thursday show. New edition of MCU Later will drop for patrons at postwrestlingcafe.com on Thursday evening. WH Park will be joined by JP Houlihan to go through episode 3 of that ongoing series. Then we go to Friday. It is Good Friday this Friday for those out there. And planning to do a news show that day, and then Rewind to SmackDown. 10:05 p.m. Eastern time is when we are planning to go live, since Rampage is on an hour earlier, and we will have a review of that as well as SmackDown. And then into the weekend we go. A new edition of Postmarks from David and Bruce Lord will be dropping on Saturday on the Patreon feed, and WrestleNomics on Sunday. So as I'm doing this all off the top of my head, I think that is the schedule for this weekend. So thanks to everybody for joining us in the chat today. Always enjoy your questions and discussion. And that is going to be it for me. And go check out postwrestling.com for all your latest news. And that's about it. So goodbye.